Mr. Lancaster. Welcome to Unfair Fight.
Thank you. That's one hell of an intro.
I know. You like that one? With the spear and everything?
It's great.
I know. Well, long time no chat since I think I was on the channel program not too long ago. Loving that, by the way. We'll touch on that a little bit later. For those that don't know you, I don't know if you want to start with a little bit of background. Obviously, everyone in the MSP space knows you. You guys founded ID Agent, exited, and I got another one going on. But how the heck did you, get in? Like, what's your story? Exit high school, go to college. What'd you do? Like, how'd you get into entrepreneurship? How'd you get into cybersecurity? Like, what's the Kevin Lancaster story?
All right, try to give you the condensed, the quick version.
It's all good. It's a podcast. You can take it where you want.
We've got time.
Yeah.
So I thought about this actually recently, kind of the origins of my entrepreneurial pursuits or journey. And a lot of it goes back to the fact that my brother was 10 years older than me. And so growing up, had this, amazing big brother. I remember being in probably middle school, something like that. And maybe 13, 14 years old and 23, 24. And he started his real estate career. And I think he was the youngest person in Remax real estate history to make $1 million. He was just killing it. This is early 90s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And he just had that hustle spirit. He just made it happen. And one of the more interesting experiences was one day I was sitting at home and I get a call at home. It's my brother saying, "Hey, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to come outside real quick and bring a pen." And it wasn't an unusual request because I figured he's riding around and maybe showing houses to clients or something like that. So grab a pen and run outside and about to do the handoff. And he's like, well, kind of making this gesture, like, look in the back seat. I'm like, look in the back seat. I'm like, hey, how you guys doing? And it didn't put two and two together, but it was Pat and Leslie Sajak in the back seat.
Get out of here.
Yeah. And so
how old was your brother then?
He was 10 years older. So let me think. This is probably, forget the dates, but I might have been 15, something like that, 16. So he's probably 25 at the time, 26.
Pat Sajak.
Yeah, and he's showing houses to Pat Sajak, and he eventually sold him a house here in Maryland over in...
Is it the one down... I think I know that one.
Yes, yep. Yeah, in Severna Park and I guess Blackpoint.
Yep.
So that was a pretty unique experience. And then at the same time, he became this really prolific real estate salesperson, agent in kind of central Maryland. So growing up, all of the, I guess back then they were the Washington Bullets, all of the Washington Capitals, he just had this ridiculous, roster, customer list. And so I saw the hustle early on, and then I, said, look, I got to figure out how to do that, so that was probably one of the more influential, things that led up to founding and starting companies, I guess. But so that's pretty prolific. In general, I was a very poor student in high school.
Right.
Mostly product of public school and kind of, lack of direction. Although I did a year at Mount St. Joseph High School up in Baltimore, which was phenomenal.
Right.
But not a great student, but I just did enough to get by. Just wasn't very, probably typical with entrepreneurs, and I couldn't sit still and learn about
That's
stuff.
A lot of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't interested in, right?
Right.
But I got, I did well enough to graduate. Ended up going to Anne Arundel Community College here locally. I guess while I was trying to find myself.
Right.
And eventually made my way to the University of Maryland. And I always wanted to be, want to go to the business school. And, again, I thought that was, the path, and, you had to have that, business school experience and all that. But I couldn't get into the business school. So I I ended up getting a history degree, but I did talk my way into working at the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship. And
Get out.
yeah, so it was, as close as I got to, being, in
When
the
was
business school.
this? When
This
was
was
this?
this is 1998, 1999, something like that. Yeah, maybe
We were
1999.
at Maryland at the same time.
Ah, there you go.
You know that?
I
Holy
did.
crap. So I was in an entrepreneurship program there
Ah,
as well.
I was trying to be like you.
But you know what? Honestly, this is embarrassing. I forget, it was the Polycom guy. What the heck was his name? Sponsored this thing.
So there
And
was,
its name changed over the years.
so it was the Dingman Center. So Michael Dingman, and then it's the gentleman that ran it. There was Dr. Heller, Dr. Lamone.
Right.
I forget Sandra's last name, but my job was to sit there and essentially intake the new business plans, collate, read through them, try as best as I could to summarize them. And it was pretty cool because they were, this is right around the time, as Kevin Plank and his crew with Under Armour. And
Oh, yeah.
so got a little exposure to that. And then, but I saw all kinds of ideas, restaurants. I think actually one of the restaurants opened up in Bethesda. I can't remember the name of it, but
Did it really?
yeah. But that just really, it was amazing, right? Because there were all kinds of businesses. It wasn't tech. Obviously, tech was starting to become a big thing because you're leading up to, Y2K and all the
Right.
stuff that was going on in Silicon Valley at the time. But
I was going hot then and crashing
yeah,
soon after. It's crazy. I'm starting to remember. I think mine was like there might have been two programs because, I was an athlete then. So when I did this entrepreneurship thing, and it was really just to like, I needed a resume pattern. So I totally mailed it in, half-assed the whole thing. There's no question about it. But I want to say it was like the Hinman program or something like that.
Sounds
and it was
familiar.
Like, there was, so maybe there was two. But yeah, you had to create a business plan, and entrepreneurs would come in and give you like advice. At night they give kind of speeches. I'll never forget this dude. He reminded me of in Silicon Valley, like the Trace Comes guy, like was it Russ Hammond or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
This freaking dude comes in and he's like, I got one piece of advice for you guys. He's like really uncut, and he's like, you just need to stay fucking liquid. And I was like, what the hell does this mean? Don't get a girlfriend. Don't get married. You'll never succeed in business if you're tied down.
Oh my
I'll never
God.
forget this. I'm like, my kid, we're just like passing this thing off. But yeah, it was actually kind of funny back then because you had a lot of that kind of Silicon Valley type entrepreneur advice. Because this, I think, was more of a tech focused, program in a way. But yeah, because Avaya sponsored it and a couple of things.
Yeah.
So you're a terp.
I'm a terp.
What next?
What next? So, kind of, what another I think interesting, maybe really influential person was that while I was going to Maryland, I was working for a pool management company that was based out of Rockville. It's called Century Pool Management, and started out it's like a summer job, right? Started out as a lifeguard, and then to kind of make ends meet. They had the opportunity to work for them year round and start selling essentially pool contracts. So all these communities,
Nice.
the apartment complexes and what have you. And never forget, there's a guy named Rob Robertson who was, I guess he was the COO or ended up being the CEO of the organization. And you think pools, how sophisticated of an operation could be, and let alone, in 1999 or whatever. But I got to sit there and watch Rob build, essentially a local empire. I mean, I think the time I had left, or actually the time I'd gotten fired, by the time I was fired, I think they had 500 plus facilities that they managed between.
That's incredible. That's big.
It was a massive operation. I mean, you're tens of millions of dollars, and you don't realize the logistics and really what goes into managing at scale that type of business. And it was really interesting because even back then, everyone talks about, now they talk about the staffing shortages and the great resignation. It's just hard to hire people. And back then we were paying kids $15, $20 an hour to sit at a swimming pool. We couldn't fill those positions. So we ended up going over to Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Estonia. I mean, primarily, Eastern Europe,
Right.
Europe countries. Actually, some of France, maybe Brazil, and we ended up bringing over about 500 lifeguards, to staff these pools over the summers. And so,
Like season, it's kind of like what the ski resorts do in a way. Out west,
absolutely,
like,
yeah, absolutely,
that seasonal work.
yeah. So it's you don't realize it in the moment, but you looking back, it's like, man, I feel like I got an MBA just working there because Rob exposed me to the finance side of the business, to the sales, the operations, logistics. I mean, he was a early Excel wizard, and that's probably where I got my obsession or knack for Excel. But so Rob was definitely another really strong influence. It was just amazing to watch him turn that into the empire that it was. And as I mentioned, I realized that I probably wasn't cut out for it. So he did me the favor of firing me, and I say that because it was a great awakening, and helped me understand that I gotta figure out really what I want to do. And it's I don't know that besides Fred Vicola, the last couple of years when I sold out agent to Kaseya, I haven't had a boss in 20 some odd years.
Right.
So I don't know what that says about myself, but that's kind of the backstory. Right? And then in 2003, kind of fast forward a little bit, at a buddy of mine that was working out in Northern Virginia, working for a government contract management company, helping companies get into the public sector. And I think he said, this is a pretty good little business, and I think we can, spin something off, do it ourselves, and, charge half of what they're charging now and scale a business. And so there's three of us, and we each put $500 into an account, got a virtual office down on Pennsylvania Avenue, and started this consulting firm called Windvale. And we went from, 0 to 100 miles an hour overnight. And, almost 20 years later, I still own 50% of that company. We've moved it to Virginia, but we've done thousands of contract vehicles for companies. We're the front door for companies like Palantir as they're getting into the public sector. We can't take obviously credit for them going public and being who they are, but it was neat.
Played a part in the story.
Yeah, it was neat to say that we picked them up at the airport. Their first trip out to DC.
Incredible.
So
and they did a ton of government work too, obviously.
Oh yeah, I mean they started all government. So that was an interesting business because Windvale allowed me to see two sides of the marketplace that now we're currently in. Right, I had this government contract consulting firm that eventually segued into becoming an IT services organization because we were doing a great job of helping companies get their own contract vehicles. We said, how hard could it be for us to get our contract vehicles and start, providing solutions to the government? So we got our GSA schedules, we got other contract vehicles, and we started selling solutions to the public sector, maybe 2005, 2006, something like that. Won a couple, massive enterprise contracts with HHS and Department of Veterans Affairs, network monitoring contracts. And it was interesting. We became an IT services provider, an integrator, and a reseller because I think, by 2010, we ended up having 70, 80, different technologies on our contract vehicles. And that was a great run. Still is a great run.
Kevin, that's, how eerily similar the story is to mine.
Let's hear it. I mean,
so I obviously, came down to go to school here from Buffalo, but I'm the youngest of four. And my older brother, Rod, he's been at Juniper, and he had headed up product at CrowdStrike, for a couple of years, and I think he's at PwC now. But when I was in '98, I was a freshman at Maryland, and he said, "Hey, knucklehead, I know you're trying to be a marketing major or something, but here's 3 Cisco books. Go learn this stuff." Right. So it was my older brother that kind of pushed me in the tech direction. So I just started learning on my own. You couldn't go to college for networking. Got a job at the SOC. Eventually, went to the National Security Agency, left, started my own government services business when they asked me to come back. And the rest is history, and did the entrepreneur program, all that stuff. I'm not sure I learned anything out of that. And same with the business school. I mean, it's a great business school and a great name and all. All I remember is like a couple lessons, which was like empower your frontline employees to make like meaningful decisions, right? It's important. I learned some case studies, but what I learned about your story and my own story is I think whether it's cybersecurity and getting really elite at that, there is no substitute for like just jumping in and doing it. And you just can't go to school and learn out of a book and magic happens. You have to have hustle, drive, mentors, and time in the grind,
Yeah.
experience. I see this much more almost like a trade where you start as like a, you know, um, an apprentice, if you're a pipe fitter or whatever, and move into kind of journeyman master. And I think the business world is kind of that way. And so is cybersecurity. So, I mean, imagine that. That is a really eerily similar story. And then somehow we landed in, tech, writing software and serving managed IT service providers. Because my background was IT prior, was network engineering before I got in the whole hacking game.
Yeah.
So pretty crazy. So now fast forward, you launched ID Agent. When did you launch ID Agent?
Yeah.
And by the way, I just want to shout out before you answer that Silicon Valley gets all the press. I got to tell you, Maryland, I think, is the hub of some of the best cybersecurity in the country.
Oh,
if you ask me.
There's no doubt about it. And I think it's now because of companies like yours. Yeah. It's getting its due, right? Because I think for a lot of long time, we always knew we had great technology, in this area, but oftentimes you just couldn't talk about it, right? Because of
you can't.
It's attached to mission, right? And just by nature, that's not a very extroverted, hey, look at me type of thing to do. But now it's just because of so many great organizations have splintered off from a lot of the agencies and created amazing technology platforms.
Right.
Put you up there with the Tenables, of the local area. So we're now finally getting our due. So so kind of going back to the origins of ID Agent, it was really born out of frustration. Right. As I mentioned, we were working with so many great technologies at Winvale, and you remember a couple amazing security platforms. This is probably 2013, 2014. And we were starting to scale, we're starting to win contracts. And then over a period of maybe 6 months, we had our three biggest partners acquired. One was called Numeric. Probably the one that we had most traction with. We had hundreds of government customers who were working with. It's a company called Numara Software, and they were acquired by BMC. Okay. And as happens when these great technology companies get acquired, as often happens, they go into this big kind of black hole, this big void of large corporations like BMC and Symantec. And so it's like, literally, if I remember, it was like 6-month period where probably 60% of our revenue was impacted by acquisition. And it's like,
oh, wow.
It's like, seriously, this again, but it ended up being like the BMCs, Symantec, Oracle. I mean, it was like just one after another. So I started thinking, I've got to figure out a way to not be as dependent, on others. And so we started looking for just different things that we could, build, commercialize. And I ran across a couple, I think, really interesting technologies. This is late 2014. And I told my business partner, I was like, there's something going on with these credentials, right? And this is pre Target and Dropbox and LinkedIn and all the big salacious ones that you've heard about. And
that were dominating the news cycle for a bit.
Yeah. So it's like, there's something going on, and, I've got to try to figure it out. So I found a couple, some individuals, let's say, and then some technology, some capabilities, and started looking at the type of data that we'd be able to find out on Tor, the dark web, as it was come to be known as. And so this is early 15. We created the first prototype of what we call dark web ID, and it was And at the time, we're selling into government, and we're going after Fortune 1000 because that's really all we knew, right?
Right.
Those were the sales cycles we knew, and
Hmm.
that's just what we were conditioned to deal with. And remember sitting across the table and with these CIOs and CISOs of you name the agency, you name the state, you name the Fortune 100, and explaining to them like, you guys have a massive problem on your hands, right? If
Right.
I have access to this data, right, that means you know every other bad guy out there has access to this data, and the time they almost responded is like it was an indictment on themselves, right?
On them.
The CISOs of these organizations were just like, we're fine. This isn't a problem. And
Not invented here.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
moving on. And but we did have some early success with some states, some government agencies, with some large sports leagues, but the sales cycles were just off the charts.
Yeah. 12,
So
14 months in a lot of cases for an
yeah,
enterprise game.
yeah, it was crazy. And so right before we pivoted, we were working with a company that was called CSID, and they eventually were acquired by Experian. But one morning I was sitting having breakfast and eating, I don't know, Cheerios or something, and I saw one of these Fed Biz Ops opportunities or GSA schedule opportunities pop up on my phone, and started looking into it. It sounded pretty bad, right?
Right.
Just they didn't go into detail, but it said privacy incident response, and the deadline to turn around to submit a proposal was like 24 hours or 48 hours or something like that. Something fast.
Brutal.
I saw it on a Friday morning, and it was due like Saturday at like 2 o'clock. And so called our team together, and we put a response together, and we ended up
That quick.
providing. Yeah, I mean it was almost like 20 hours of like nonstop
So
proposal.
lesson to MSP owners and business owners is when you see an opportunity, don't waste it. Jump.
You had to jump on it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this just looked, just eerie. I mean, it's eerie, the timing
Hmm.
of that contract and what was going on, what we were seeing. And
Hmm.
so that ended up being the breach response contract that we won for OPM after the first of the two OPM data breaches at the time. And so that was a really interesting period because we won this massive contract. I spent the next 6 months, 9 months up on Capitol Hill, meeting with every one of our congressmen and women and our senators and
Wow.
all their staffs and other agencies, saying, look, same thing. There's a massive problem, that's out there. Obviously, it was one credential, one exploit that led to OPM, but we could show that, based on this population, there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of compromised credentials out there that could impact, our government networks. And
Right.
it's almost the same response. It was actually even more deflating because we're sitting there working with, some of the committees up on the Hill and saying,
Right.
again, you guys have a massive problem. And, so, I get tired of beating my head against the wall. But
Right.
it was really wild to see that play out publicly the next couple of years in elections
That
and
was a big deal. That
yeah,
was a big deal. I still remember. I'm like using JPass back. Damn. Like what the shit?
yeah,
This looks like it was built in 1998. Like this
hmm
can't be good.
yeah.
Turned out
No,
it wasn't good.
no,
Like
it absolutely wasn't. But
yeah.
yeah, so it was phenomenal in that we won this massive contract, and it
Right.
was it was actually a lot of the seed that we had to build out ideation. But at the same time, it was personally frustrating because again, I'm you know, trying to create change up on the Hill and
Right.
agencies and what have you, and go into these meetings, and left hand couldn't talk to right hand.
Ugh.
Even in the intelligence circles, you'd be in a
Oh
room,
yeah.
they'd look across the table and figure out, well, who has jurisdiction, and is there an incident or is there not? And I'm like, well, I can't tell you if there's an incident, but I can tell you there's probably an incident, based
Right.
on all the data that we see out here.
Right.
So anyway, that was pretty wild times, but you know, taking that, kind of the lessons learned and kind of beating the head against the wall in enterprise, we're trying to build out this dark web product, and
Hmm.
so we eventually spun ID Agent out, and right around that time, I'd hired a guy named Matt Solomon in the consulting firm, and I give him a lot of grief publicly, but
Right.
it's funny if anybody knows Matt's listening to this. I always say that Matt pre-ID agent,
Right.
was a different Matt, very serious, very almost like stoic, very just structured sales guy. But then we had an article written on us in MSP Mentor magazine as we were kind of trying to figure out how do we pivot into these different
Really?
marketplace. Yeah, this guy forget the who wrote the article, but wrote the article, and the next day the phone wouldn't stop ringing, the inquiries wouldn't stop, and so we went from beating our head against the wall in enterprise and these long sales cycles to holy crap, the MSPs actually get it, like they
Right.
understand what the value of these compromised credentials, and
Sure.
it was a really interesting pivot point because I wouldn't have bet that the MSP space would have picked up on, dark web and using this type of tool or that type of tool at the time to help build their business. And
Mm.
I was sorely mistaken because, we went on from, having a couple dozen enterprise customers to 2,000 MSPs in 24 months,
You
and it was,
know, that was we started selling to large enterprise too.
yeah,
Another similarity because that's what I knew, kind of large. And I ran into the issue where it was like the tech was ahead of its time. It was a SOAR platform, out of the box, not one where you got to link up where people they didn't even know what that was. Seam was hot then. And then I also realized, man, these guys, one, they outsource most of it. They don't have real security operation centers because our theory was we'd sell it to them. They'd use our platform to run it themselves, and some did. But the reality is, I came out of the government thinking, man, these CISOs of these large companies must have really sophisticated security operations. And then I looked, and it's like they outsource logging to these knuckleheads over here, and they still all get hacked.
yeah,
And we stumbled into MSP too. MSPs just kept seeing it, and they had more interest because they felt the pain more when their customers got ransomware. And it
sure,
was shocking. Like the stories have a lot of parallels.
yeah. Now we should actually talk to each other before we start our next businesses, I
I know.
guess.
I know. It's so as you kind of pivot to MSP, what do you think the biggest challenge MSP owners, operators are going to face over the next 12 to 24 months? I mean, it tends when economies soften a bit, SMB gets kind of can feel the pain first.
Yeah.
How do you think they should approach, kind of gearing up, as a successful, business operator?
Yeah, look, I think we're at really interesting times, right? Because you look
Yeah,
at things that are going on at a macroeconomic level, right? Just
right,
a general slowdown and call it a recession,
right,
spiking fuel prices. I mean, and a shortage of labor, right? I mean,
right,
it's very challenging, right? It's very challenging times for MSPs, um, and it's I think one of the things that would that I see a lot with
hmm,
MSPs, as you go to a lot of the events, and as you do see kind of this shiny object
yeah,
syndrome
right,
at these events, and there's a lot of here today, gone tomorrow type of technologies, and on one hand you want to see that, right, because it's a healthy ecosystem and you want to see
sure,
evolving, emerging, but I think it's a time for the MSP space to take a pause and really lean into the vendors that they're working with now. And inversely, it's the time for the vendors to lean in and better support their MSPs. And I think,
right,
we get on the other side of this, just like you get through, any economic downturn, you'll see the winners out of this, right? And it's, I think it's the vendors that have
yeah,
leaned in and provided the support. And it's the MSPs that have kind of, taken a pause, kind of become a little bit more self-aware about their stack and working with trusted, solutions,
right,
um, and building upon that. And so I think it's a unfortunate reality, I think, for some of the vendors in the space, but I think, the
right,
ones that have been in the space for the last couple of years that have leaned in and helped on education and really got the
right.
MSPs empowered, those are ones that they're going to survive, through the
They'll
next
survive.
24 months.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I look at it, I think if you follow the trend of cyber insurance, right, up until probably mid 2019, they were printing money because there
Mhm.
weren't a lot of like ransomware claims. Then they started losing money and having claims just wipe out their premium stack. And I think what's interesting is MSPs were getting hit pretty hard. Then we had, the VPN vulnerabilities and the exchange stuff, then the Cassay event, and the insurers got scared of MSPs, and they still are terrified of them. They don't like writing policies for them. And so I think what happened is the MSPs got a lot wiser on security. Um, but as we both know, the devil's in the details in this game, because when
Absolutely.
you're running a business, there's only so much an end user can pay, really, per user, per endpoint, however you decide to price it. And what I'm watching now is there was a lot of that shiny object, shiny ball, or, kind of kid soccer syndrome, where buying lots of tools, they felt good, they brief good. And now I'm watching them deal with the tax of actually having to implement and run these things.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really, really important time. One of my board members calls it doing the business physics. And it was kind of like what you talked about with your, the kind of, I don't know if you're the CFO or COO of the pool company, who kind of was such an Excel wizard. But the point is really modeling your business. It's more of a science than anything.
Yeah.
Modeling your business operation, understanding your business physics, your true cogs, and then building like a security stack and the rest of your IT tooling stack, where your exact margins, your pricing, that overhead tax that comes with, I talked to someone the other day, 9,000 endpoints of a product out there that is becoming very popular right now, but also becomes brutally annoying to run and a bad customer experience on the end, because there's so much, approvals that have to go into this product. And I think now what I'm watching, and I think, to your point, wise advice is you got to really tighten up the stack and focus on the absolute most value driving components, the things that keep you from getting like totally owned, or your end customer getting, totally ransomwared, the things that help them be compliant, right? Because let's call it what it is. Compliance many times the cost of doing business. It doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily make you more secure. Um, it's cost of doing business for a lot of companies. So, I think it's pretty good advice I like ringing the alarm bells early, and that whole two is one is none approach, where you always have a backup plan.
Yeah.
But
But I think if I can say, I mean, in this new venture that we have, right? This channel program
right.
venture, we're in a unique position where we're seeing all of the vendors, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
pretty cool.
we're getting feedback from the MSPs about all of the vendors, and we're getting feedback, on a couple different areas. So look at the value proposition of the vendor or their product,
Right.
how differentiated they are versus their competitors, and then one of the questions we ask is, how would you rate their channel program, right? Their
Hmm.
enablement, how are they enabling you, and uh, just in full transparency, you guys scored amongst the highest out of any vendor we've ever had, and
Hmm.
I think that's something to be said. Something to be said, because you guys, um, as you've come into the space, right? You've kind of had this. We're in here for the long term
Yeah.
view, right? I mean, there's
Oh, there's
a
no question.
ton of vendors that have come in, and it's been, again, here today, and we just want to, move on or whatever, or
Right.
you know, they take one foot in and then one foot out, whatever. But what I've seen from you guys is that you guys have spent the time to educate, uh, to empower, to enable, and very few vendors really get that right, right? And
Yeah.
that's part of
It's
what I think that these MSPs need to really take survey of, is the vendors that are
right.
really, there for the long term, really investing in education, because
Right.
that's
It's actually something
how
we need to do a
yeah.
lot. I mean, we're doing a lot more stuff with, Blackpoint Command. We launched that. We're really trying to teach MSPs, like, here's a security stack you need to that we think, like, and this is not a sales thing. Like, we have our theories, and of course we're in business to sell stuff, but this is the stack, the classes of products we think you really need. Here's the lens you should look at any network with, and here's a common language to talk to your end customers, because they don't know the difference between the next gen firewall or UTM when you're selling a construction company, from EDR to MDR or XDR or whatever the heck the next acronym is going to be, and then how to price it, right? And kind of margins, and think about, kind of like the Gary Pico, he does a good job at kind of, teaching folks that. So, talk to me a bit about your new venture, the channel program. I know we loved it, by the way. It worked awesome. And I love the short format. and the product review stuff. It was really cool. What gave you that idea?
So after I'd exited from Kaseya, and
Right.
it was a great experience. I mean, Fred was just phenomenal CEO, and
Sure.
allowed me to do a lot of great things there. Corp dev, and acquired a whole bunch of companies. It did a
That's
lot with,
fun.
yeah, that was fun, right?
Yeah.
Ran a lot of the go to market, and really try to restructure how they sell based on how AD Agent sold,
Right.
and enabled partners. So I had a great experience there, but again, kind of had always this entrepreneurial mindset, and
Mhm.
like trying to solve problems, right? And
Right.
so it was April of 2021, so just over a year ago, and I said, "There's got to be a way to help other vendors, you know, enter this space, and do it right.
Right.
Um, do it right by do it right. A couple different things, right? Just invest the right dollars, because you see a ton of wasted dollars invested in this space.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
just spinning wheels. Doing it right by creating the right enablement program to
Mhm.
help MSPs, because a lot of the vendors that have come into this space over the last year have come down from enterprise, and how you sell to enterprise versus how you sell an MSP is completely different. So
Totally. It
yeah,
is. It is totally
it's
different. Yeah.
totally different, right? And
Yeah.
what the MSP needs is totally different than what enterprise needs, right? They need enablement, they need education, they need support.
Mhm.
Um, and enterprise needs some of that stuff, but MSPs are building businesses around, in some cases, two, three, four, five vendors, right? And so
Right.
they need a trusted partner. So
They need to choose wisely, right?
they
I
have to
mean,
choose wisely. So I think the challenge that we're trying to solve with this platform is that there are thousands of vendors that are looking to channel, right?
right.
And we were fortunate, blessed that Ideation grew as fast as it did, but it grew as fast as it did because we made it simple, and we
Mhm.
enabled and we empowered the heck out of our partners. And so can we build a platform that helps these emerging vendors, do the same thing? Um, and help them enter the space, get their pitch down real, just down to 7 minutes, right? Get
Right.
down to brass tacks. What do you do? How are you different? And how are you going to help me grow? Right? Is
Right.
basically what we instruct vendors to
Just
talk
like
about
your old
this.
entrepreneur program, the elevator pitch. You better nail that sucker.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
if you've seen this industry evolve, right? You go to
Right.
the big events, and it's all right, 30 minutes here, 45 minutes there, and it's you slide people to death, you statistic people to death, and at the end
Oh
of it,
yeah.
it's like, I can't tell how you're different than the other, nine other vendors that are down the row, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was like, get the pitch down, and so we worked with vendors to get the pitch down, and at the same time, our message to the MSPs was that you log into pitch, and all we ask is that you provide feedback, right?
Right.
And you decide whether you want to engage with the vendor or not. And that's obviously that's a lot different than going to a trade show,
Right.
and then the trade show producer gives the vendor the list of everybody's there, and the following Monday or Tuesday,
And then
every
it gets
MSP,
blown up.
yeah, they get
Those poor
nine,
MSPs.
yeah,
I mean,
they
you're
do.
spending 50 to 100K at these shows, right? A lot of them, the bigger ones, sometimes more. But yeah, no, I think this format's helpful because I think there is, it's kind of like information operations, disinformation. I'm not saying vendors are putting out disinformation. This is more of an analogy. It's one where, the best lie is one that is like 90% true
Right.
because it makes the last 10% believable.
Yeah.
And what happens when you have such a volume of information and the talking points are all, within 10 to 20% of, being the same thing in the security side. I don't know how the end consumer can truly differentiate and say, yeah, this is a company I want to go with. This is one I trust, especially when, one of my other board members, John Stewart, he was the chief security officer at Cisco for years and years. He likes the term silicon snake oil because there's a heck of a lot of it out there. And I
Yeah.
think your pitch really kind of separates, the companies that got it down and those that don't. And I think it's a really good service for the MSP as
Yeah.
well, in my opinion. I was a big fan of the format. It was so like I didn't expect it, but I
Yeah.
loved it. It was fun.
I appreciate that. I think, again,
Yeah.
byproducts. What's interesting is that you've seen some companies that have had a hard time with their messaging really struggle in those 7 minutes.
Right.
And I think it comes across. And now, we literally just wrapped about an hour ago on our seventh pitch, and I think the MSPs that have participated, they've been kind of conditioned, because they see the format and they
Right.
appreciate the format, and I think they can see, which vendors really have their shit together and which ones that
Right.
don't. Right.
You're right, and they know what they're talking about because they can, you know,
Yeah, it
it's one of
comes
those
through.
things. If you
Yeah.
can't explain something simply, even if it's complicated, then you don't actually understand it, right?
Yeah, but that's how, if you look through the lens of an MSP, that's what they see all
Right.
day long. And they want to see these technologies. They need to see what's
Yeah.
coming down the pike. They want to
Yeah.
see, what's new and innovative and what really needs to be, added to their stack and what have you.
Right.
But I think a lot of the vendors have really done a disservice over the years, because they've talked in circles and talked in circles, and unfortunately a lot of the vendors end up paying the price for it, because it's that failure to adopt. Right, the
Right.
MSP buys the solution, and then 6 months later you're waiting for them to deploy their first whatever, and
Right.
and then it's on to churn. Right, and that's obviously the kiss of death for these
Ugh.
vendors.
That's
And
a
so
death sentence. It's so funny. Especially for like SaaS companies, there's certain metrics. This would be a wild one for MSPs. Maybe a piece of advice in vendor vetting. Ask them some of their SaaS metrics. What's your gross retention rate on revenue? What's your gross retention rate on customer? What's your net retention rate? Right? You know, I think some of these things with LTV CAC, interesting one, right? It shows you like, do you actually know how to run a freaking business? Are you going to be around here for the long haul? Or is this, I've raised crap tons of money at an obnoxious valuation. I'm going to spend, spend, spend. And boy, I hope you catch up and grow so fast. Because what's going to happen, what's happening, not going to happen, it's happening now, is the companies that raise so much money at such a high valuation had to hit these crazy lofty targets. Now we're entering a little bit of an economic downturn, and a lot of those companies are ones where they try and market and hype fast and catch up on tech,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Then they get into a situation where their burn is so out of control, the product quality is going to suffer. They're going to have a hard time retaining, really good talent. Their product is going to, just everything's going to suffer. And then when you have to go back to the well, when money's a lot more expensive to raise, this is like Silicon Valley. There was remember that scene where the guy's sitting at the bar, and I'm going to paraphrase it wrong, but um, he was saying like, no one told me I could take too much or so much money, like too
yeah,
much money,
yeah, yeah, yep,
because that's how
yeah,
the founder got washed,
absolutely.
washed out and diluted in the down round. It's
You're so spot on, because even
yeah,
again, going back a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, while I was at Kaseya, I was looking at these technologies, these
yeah,
vendors to buy and fold into the stack. I remember having dozens of
yeah,
meetings where it's like you could see just first 5 minutes into the presentation, they were way overfunded and they weren't
yeah,
at velocity. And this was like, this was their Hail Mary, is to be
right,
acquired. In I couldn't imagine, right now with some of those where, to your point, the cost of money has gone up dramatically. Valuations have gone down,
dramatically.
at least a couple turns, if not dramatically, and
Yeah,
you've got this like really this unfortunate accordion that's going to
yeah,
really squeeze out a lot of vendors. And so you're spot on, because
yeah,
it would be an amazing, day where we could get the MSPs to that level of maturity where they're
right,
asking those types of questions, right?
yeah.
I mean, yeah, if you're asking about retention and CAC and lifetime value, I mean,
Yeah.
that stuff is
Like the rule
is
of 40, I think that one's changing too. I think it's be like the rule of 80 now, because, it's one thing when money's cheap, you get valued on growth above all else. But when money gets expensive to raise, it goes back to old school traditional fundamentals,
it
right?
does. Yeah, it does.
And it's
Yeah.
critically important. And I think this is something I think the MSPs really should focus on when there's a new hot company marketing, and um, you can kind of tell, do you really have fundamentals that's going to allow you to stay around, or are you going to be the next, WeWork,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
right?
it's unfortunate, but these are the cycles that I guess
Yeah.
we all go through, right? You get, the hype
Yeah.
and the valuation, and then cool off. And you'd think that people would learn their lesson, but
Right.
it's, I guess greed, greed
Yeah.
takes over,
W- Yeah.
yeah, rationale, I
The good
guess.
news is, heading into the recession, there's in 2022 and post pandemic, there's one thing that's not going away. Folks are going to become more and more and more and more reliant on information technology and having that secure and up. And if anything, if you have to cut people, and that's one of your ways to cut costs, and you're more reliant on technology to automate and fill in the gap. So I don't think it's all bad. But I definitely encourage the MSPs to really kind of think through their business. Man, I tell you, want to be an awesome podcast, Kevin,
So
is especially since you're sitting corp dev, or maybe to bring a head of corp dev on from one of the big companies in the MSP space, one of the RMMs, and have them give a clinic on how they evaluate companies and valuation, what makes something super valuable. Because I think most of the lessons apply to MSPs, especially when you're watching MSPs get rolled up in a lot of consolidation by private equities. That would be a really fascinating one, because I think there needs to be more. I think one thing us as vendors can do a lot better is more education to our channel, our partners, our MSP partners, on the fundamentals of running a really sound business
yeah,
and how to think about it. Because I got to be candid, like, I came out of the agency, I had a lot of experience in, like, operations, right? The I didn't have a damn clue how to go to market. I knew how to build great tech, but that's the other thing. The best product only wins like 50% of the time. There's that other 50% that's super important, and I had to learn it the hard way,
yeah.
straight up. Yeah, I mean, you're one of the few guys in this space that's done it multiple times, right? And I think the channel program is a great service to the MSP community and the vendors. So
Oh,
it's much appreciated.
appreciate it. I mean, we're just trying to, in part, give back and build something
Yeah,
that's meaningful for, both
yeah.
sides of the marketplace. And I don't know. It's especially during these times, if we can build something of value and
Sure.
it's meaningful and it brings the industry together and it makes it easier to do business with each other, then I think we've accomplished our goal.
Kevin, I think even heading into a recession, a platform that allows, vendors selling their wares and those that need it to connect at a lower price without having to spend 100 grand at a show is big. Because, we'll kind of end it on this, but, I think one area that's really important for MSPs to think about and really try and get telemetry on their business is like their costs of lead acquisition. How do they get their leads? And do you have like an MQL type concept, a marketing qualified lead concept, where you can get leads, you assign some sort of intent to them, and then you have a formal conversion through, kind of converting to a sales qualified lead and following that kind of Sandler style funnel, to really build a structured approach to selling. I mean, that's critical. I did not know any of this when I launched this company, just straight up, just being
Yeah.
totally candid. I've learned the hard way, but now it works really well.
But
So,
like, I think
yeah,
that's probably any other kind of lasting
yeah,
piece of advice or food for thought. I mean, I think that's what my career's been, and that just most entrepreneurs, right? You
right.
have to have had the sleepless nights. You have to have had the
Oh
mess
yeah,
ups, right?
yep,
You had to go through the grind, and do all the wrong things to at least have a shot moving forward at doing some of the right things, right?
right.
And and again, talking about maturity and, a lot of the MSPs probably share our similar story or
Hmm.
background, right? It's
Yeah,
they're, a lot of them are technical, not necessarily, business oriented individuals, and
right.
they have to learn it, and I do think in general, I mean, kind of ending on a positive, I do think in general, like the industry is done well to help educate
I
MSPs
think
over the
so.
last couple of years in a couple of different areas, right? Just sales and marketing.
Yep.
There have been organizations that have popped up to help them with their metrics and kind of business fundamentals, but it's still a maturity curve, right? And you're always going to
Right.
have new entrants into the space that are at the beginning of that curve trying to learn it, and so and
Got it.
that's why I think we're so envious of what you guys have done in empowering, educating, giving back. And again, those are the vendors that will, not only succeed, during kind of the downturns, but they'll thrive and beyond. So, you guys are doing it right. So,
Oh,
Well
I
done.
appreciate that. Well, Kevin Lancaster, thanks for joining this podcast episode. You're a great asset to the MSP community, and look forward to seeing you at one of these shows because I'm sure you're good at those too. No
Absolutely.
bully.
No doubt about it.
All right, brother. Well, thank you so much. It was great having you.
You got it, bud. Thanks for having me.
See ya.